An Israeli airstrike on Beit Lahiya in northern Gaza kills at least 16 Palestinians and injures others. Yemen's Houthis fire a ballistic missile towards Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announces his support for US President Trump's push for a limited ceasefire with Russia. Hello, good morning. It's 10 o'clock Cairo local time and you're watching Q News. And we begin today's bulletin with the latest on Gaza. An Israeli airstrike on Beit Lahiya town in the northern Gaza Strip has killed at least 16 Palestinians and injured others. Israeli fighter jets conducted an airstrike that targeted the mourners who gathered to offer condolences for Palestinians killed in the Salatin area in Beit Lahiya. Israel unilaterally ended the Gaza ceasefire agreement and resumed its aggression on the Strip on Tuesday, March 18th, carrying out a wave of bloody airstrikes across the Gaza Strip and killing hundreds of Palestinians, including more than 100 children. A foreign national has been killed and at least 5 others were wounded in an Israeli airstrike on the site of a UN headquarters in central Gaza City. The executive director for the UN Office of Project Services, Jorge Moreira da Silva, said the UN compound is located in a deconflicted zone well known by the Israeli forces. Da Silva added that the UN does not yet know what type of artillery was used and is investigating it.
Premises in Gaza. It is understood.
The UN Secretary General has condemned attacks on UN personnel. In a statement, the UN Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq said all parties in Israel's attack on Gaza knew where the UN premises were based. Haq said that at least 280 UN staff had been killed in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023.
When 2 UN guest houses in Deir al-Balah were hit in strikes.
The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has condemned the killing of a UN staff member in this suspected Israeli strike in the central Gaza Strip. UNRWA Commissioner General Felipe Lazzarini decried the killing of an employee of the UN Office for Project Services in a suspected Israeli airstrike that targeted one of the body's buildings in Deir al-Balah as another black day for the UN in Gaza. He stressed the need to protect humanitarian personnel at all times and noted that the UN, including UNRWA, continues to pay dearly while conducting its humanitarian duties. Leaders of France and Jordan have called for a halt of hostilities in Gaza and a political solution to the conflict. Jordan's King Abdullah called for the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza to be restored and for aid flows to resume. The French President Emmanuel Macron said that the negotiations between Israel and Hamas over the crisis in Gaza had to be back on the table.
That adds further devastation to an already dire humanitarian situation.
Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has issued a last warning to Gazans, saying they should follow the advice of President Trump and return Israeli detainees and remove Hamas from power. Katz said, what is coming will be more difficult and Gazans will pay the price. He added soon the evacuation of residents from combat zones will begin again. And if Gazans don't return the Israeli detainees and Hamas is not being removed from Gaza, Israel will act with force like hasn't been seen before.
ישראל תפעל בעוצמות שעוד לא הכרתם. תושבי עזה, זאת פניית הזרה האחרונה. הסנוואר הראשון הרס את עזה, והסנוואר השני יחריב אותה לחלוטין. תקיפת חיל האוויר נגד מקבלי
The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has voiced his deep concern over Israel's renewed bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Starmer told the House of Commons he is deeply concerned about the resumption of Israeli military action in Gaza. He pledged that the UK would do all it could to ensure the resumption of the ceasefire and to get aid that's desperately needed into the Strip. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has said that more than 170 children were killed during the Israeli occupation's aggression on the Gaza Strip. The office stated in a statement that the total number of slain civilians as a result of these raids reached more than 400, including more than 170 children and 80 women. It noted that rescue teams and paramedics were unable to reach many of the victims due to a lack of equipment, fuel and heavy machinery. The office explained that only 4 field hospitals are fully operational in the area, while 22 hospitals and 6 field hospitals are partially operational. Palestinians in Beit Hanun in the north of Gaza have been forcibly displaced after the Israeli army issued new evacuation orders for several neighborhoods. The Israeli army dropped leaflets in the northern and southern Gaza Strip, ordering residents to evacuate their homes, warning they were in dangerous combat zones. Israel warned the onslaught was just the beginning. More than 1,000 protesters have marched in Barcelona in Spain after Israel ended the ceasefire in Gaza. People shouted slogans calling for a boycott of Israel and denounced global inaction over the resumption of hostilities. The Israeli military said its forces resumed ground operations in the central and southern Gaza Strip as a second day of airstrikes killed at least 48 Palestinians. That's according to local health workers. The renewed ground operations came a day after more than 400 Palestinians were killed in airstrikes in one of the deadliest episodes since the beginning of the conflict, shattering a ceasefire that has largely held since January. Israeli police have dispersed crowds with water cannons as protesters demonstrated against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. Thousands of Israeli protesters marched towards Jerusalem, calling for the return of Gaza detainees and the safeguarding of democracy. The decision to resume the war with 59 detainees, around which 24 of whom are believed to be still alive, still held in Gaza, has added fresh momentum to anti-government rallies, with protesters accusing the current administration of continuing the conflict for political reasons. Yemen's Houthis have fired a ballistic missile towards Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv. The group's military spokesperson said for the 5th day in a row they continue to effectively and responsibly confront the American aggression against Yemen. Sirens sounded across several areas in Israel after the projectile was fired, the military said. The Israeli police said sirens were heard in Tel Aviv and occupied Jerusalem. Israel's occupation military has said it intercepted a missile launched from Yemen as hostilities with the Houthis intensified. Sirens sounded in several areas in Israel after the projectile was fired, the military said. The Israeli police said sirens were heard in Tel Aviv and across occupied Jerusalem. And Israel's ambulance service said there were no serious injuries reported. Meanwhile, the United States has struck targets in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a. This is the latest in a wave of strikes carried out in retaliation for attacks by the group on the shipping in the Red Sea. In a video released by the US Central Command, fighter jets were seen taking off from an aircraft carrier from an unidentified location, as the US said it is continuing operations against the Houthis. US President Donald Trump has said that Iran must immediately stop sending military supplies to the Houthis. In a post on Truth Social, Trump added that US strikes on the Houthis will get progressively worse and that they will be annihilated. His comments come less than a week after US airstrikes took out some of the group's top leaders. The US said these strikes were made because of attacks by the group on ships in the areas. Now, let's get the latest developments on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced his support for US President Trump's push for a limited ceasefire with Russia. Zelensky said in a statement that Ukrainian and US officials will resolve technical issues related to implementing and expanding the partial ceasefire. The US had proposed that both sides halt attacks on energy facilities and infrastructure as a first step towards a broader peace deal. The Kremlin has said that Russia has suspended its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure after the phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and had shot down its own Ukraine-bound drones while they were in the air. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Russia had called off a drone attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure targets and had shot down 7 of its own drones. Peskov, in turn, accused Ukraine of not respecting the 30-day moratorium on striking each other's energy infrastructure and said it had tried to attack a Russian energy infrastructure overnight. Ukraine's President Zelensky has said that he and his US counterpart, Donald Trump, discussed an energy strike ceasefire with Russia. Zelensky said Ukraine would draw up a list of facilities that could be subject to a partial ceasefire brokered by the US. Zelensky said he and Trump also discussed only the vast Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine during their phone call. He added that he told Trump that Kyiv would be ready to discuss US involvement in modernizing and investing in the nuclear plant if it is returned to Ukraine. The White House has announced that it has moved beyond the previously negotiated US-Ukraine minerals and natural resources deal. The White House spokesperson Karoline Leavitt has said the US is shifting its focus to securing peace between Ukraine and Russia. In a statement following an hour-long call between Trump and Zelensky, the White House said Zelensky expressed gratitude for US support. Also noted that technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days. Leavitt added that Zelensky requested additional air defense support to protect civilians from Russian attacks. Trump assured him that he would help locate the necessary equipment in Europe.
The two leaders also agreed on a partial ceasefire against energy. Technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days to discuss.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said that the EU had to back efforts by US President Trump to get a peace deal in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Asked if he continued to oppose the EU giving more money to Ukraine, Orban said the EU doesn't support it. Orban was commenting to reporters as they arrived in Brussels for a meeting of the Patriots for Europe, the European Parliament's third largest voting bloc. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has said he discussed with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky the progress Trump has made towards ceasefire talks with Russia. President Putin agreed to temporarily stop attacking Ukrainian energy facilities, but declined to endorse a full 30-day ceasefire that Trump hopes would be the first step toward a permanent peace deal. Ukraine said it would support the scaled-back agreement, which would require both countries to hold off on firing on each other's energy infrastructure for 30 days.
Progress that President Trump had made with Russia towards a ceasefire, and I took the opportunity to reaffirm our unwavering support to the people of Ukraine.
Questions?
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I spoke to...
Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Russian troops were completing the defeat of Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region after a 7-month incursion by Kyiv's forces. The incursion, which began in August, was aimed at diverting Moscow's forces from eastern Ukraine, gaining a bargaining chip in any future talks and riling Putin.
Согласно законам Российской Федерации, все военнослужащие украинской армии,
Russia's prison exchange with Ukraine has been finalized during a telephone call between Trump and Putin. Russia's defense ministry said that 175 Ukrainian soldiers had been swapped for 175 Russian servicemen. Moscow had handed over an additional 22 heavily wounded Ukrainian prisoners in need of urgent medical care in what it described as a goodwill gesture. The defense ministry said the United Arab Emirates had mediated the deal. Now, for all things money, let's go across to our newsroom where Selma Marwan is there for us. Morning, Selma.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. And now we move to the economic news, where we present you with the latest insights and developments around the world. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept interest rates at its target range of 4.25% to 4.5%. Fed Chair Powell said the central bank's forecast for less economic growth and higher inflation in 2025 somewhat offset each other, explaining the fact that the forecast for rate cuts this year stayed at 2. Powell added a good part of the central bank's higher inflation expectation comes from tariffs. He also noted that while economists outside of the Fed have generally raised their estimated likelihood of a recession, a severe downturn still isn't likely. U.S. President Donald Trump has said the Federal Reserve would be better off cutting rates as U.S. tariffs start to transition their way into the economy. Trump's comment came just hours after the Fed left rates unchanged and made no changes to its expectations for rate cuts this year. He added that April 2nd, the date when his plans for increased trade tariffs are set to be revealed, is Liberation Day for the country. Trump has repeatedly called on the central bank to further cut interest rates, given that lower rates are likely to further his agenda of improving U.S. economic growth. The European Union has stated it will tighten steel import quotas to reduce inflows by a further 15% from April. European Commission Executive Vice President Stefan Suzeruni said this comes in a bid to prevent cheap steel from flooding the European market after the Trump administration imposed new tariffs. Suzeruni said a first measure would be to tighten import quotas, known as safeguards, for multiple steel grades from April 1st, which would cut inflows by approximately 15%. China has held benchmark lending rates steady for the fifth straight month in March, matching market expectations. Early signs of the economic recovery gaining some momentum and persistently narrowing profit margins for lenders have reduced the urgency for more easing measures, despite the central bank's shift to an appropriately loose monetary policy stance this year. The one-year loan prime rate was kept at 3.1%, while the five-year loan prime rate was unchanged at 3.6%. Argentina's economy shrank 1.7% in 2024 compared with the prior year. According to the country's statistics agency, the economy expanded for the second consecutive time in quarterly terms in the last 3 months of the year. Argentina's gross domestic product, however, expanded 1.4% in the fourth quarter compared to the previous one in seasonally adjusted terms, marking the second quarter-on-quarter expansion in a row. Year-on-year, Argentina's gross domestic product also posted an increase of 2.1% in the October to December period, beating analyst forecasts for a 1.7% expansion. Gold prices have soared to an all-time high following remarks from Fed Chair Jerome Powell and as the U.S. Federal Reserve held interest rates steady as anticipated. Spot gold was up 0.1% at $3,049.89, and U.S. gold futures gained 0.6% to $3,058.40 per ounce. And now we go back to Mark in our studio.
Thank you very much, Selma. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's get recap on the main news headlines this morning. An Israeli airstrike on Beit Lahiya in northern Gaza kills at least 16 Palestinians and injures others. Yemen's Houthis fire a ballistic missile towards Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announces his support for US President Trump's push for a limited ceasefire with Russia. Well, that's all for our news bulletin for this hour, but don't forget you can follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good morning.